Years ago, I interviewed for one of my books called The 100X Leader. I interviewed the Sherpa on Mount Everest in a tent. They had Wi-Fi, and I asked them. I was like, "Okay, guys, so how many times have you made it to the top?" And they looked at me and are like, "That's such a Western question. We get that all the time. We hate that question." And one of them pulled off a belt, and it was Fanuru. And Fanuru pulled the belt, and he had 17 notches in his belt. And he goes, "I don't know how many times I've summited, but I've helped 17 people make it to the top."
Welcome to the Stacking Habits Podcast with your hosts, David, Matthew, and Caleb. Our mission each week is to dig into the habits, rituals, and routines of guests who are living life to the fullest. But remember, knowledge without action is worthless. So be sure to take what you hear and put it into practice. Turn these words into works in your own life. Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Stacking Habits Podcast. I'm your host, Caleb. We're joined by Matthew, and all the way from Oklahoma City, we have Jeremie Kubicek coming to the show. Jeremie is a top 100 speaker. He's a serial entrepreneur, not breakfast cereal. He's just done it a number of times. He's co-founder of Giants Worldwide, which we'll talk about in just a minute. 6 Summers, Zoe, and Better. And he also, we were just chatting pre-show, provides sports performance expertise to the University of Oklahoma football. So he is a busy man. We're really excited that you've given us some of your time, Jeremie, and to kind of dive into these pieces as well. And if that's not enough, it says you even manage a wedding venue on 104 acres in Oklahoma. So
yeah, my wife does. It's a 1,000-acre farm, and
it was off by a magnitude.
105-year-old farm at this point. But my wife does that work, and so it's really fun. Yeah, it's fun. Just different.
That's incredible. So the reason we heard about Giant Worldwide, episode 5, we interviewed Audrey Wyman, and she introduced us real briefly, kind of talked through the 5 gears framework. I'd never heard of it. I'd never even heard of Giant Worldwide. Shame on me. And since then, I have picked up 5 voices, communication code, and more. So I know you just finished writing the communication code, and I do want to dive into that. But what do you love about frameworks so much? So each of these books has a framework with 5 main points. Most pastors have 3. You tend to be an overachiever and go to 5. So can you explain what you love about frameworks and why those are so valuable?
So in the past, I used to run these big events, and I used to work with these big brands. So we had bought the John Maxwell's assets. I had started the Chick-fil-A LeaderCast, the Catalyst conferences, all these really, really large events. And they were kind of, the framework was butts and seats selling books. And then it was kind of 20th century learning was a lot of bullet points, some stories mixed in. And I realized that 21st century learning, there's not that much time. 21st century learning is a visual. You have to create common objective language, put it in visual form so it's sticky and it's simple, scalable, and sustainable. And so in essence, it's been my journey in 21st century adult learning that most adults are cynical know-it-alls. So you have to frame it very quickly, and you have to build it into a metaphor that they cannot forget. It just stays with them. So like the 5 years is kind of work-life balance. You won't forget it once you go through it. The 5 voices is personality. It takes Carl Jung's work and where Myers-Briggs and all of these big 5, all these things that come from, but they're hard to remember. It's hard to remember INTJ or to know how to explain it. But if you say I'm a pioneer or I'm a nurturer, then you'll remember it. So all of them are designed to be just memorable, and then something that you can actually teach on a cocktail napkin to somebody else. That's how you learn. If you can teach it to someone else, you learn it because you teach when you learn. So you learn when you teach.
I like that.
Yeah, kind of the napkin test. It should work for a business idea or business concept as well. So if you can distill it down. I know in the book you talk about trying to simplify things so it's easy enough for a 13-year-old to learn the concepts. And do you think, so our podcast is all about being practical and putting things into action. Do you have to understand something first before you can put it into action? Is that why a simple framework is sort of a necessary construct?
What I would say is you can't give what you don't possess. So you give what you possess. So if you learn something for yourself, you're like, oh my goodness, I do that, don't I? we have this tool called Know Yourself to Lead Yourself. And it's this idea that you understand your tendencies. Tendencies have patterns, patterns have actions. If you want to change your actions, you have to be aware of your tendencies. You have to be aware of this flow. So by teaching a framework or teaching a tool and having it have a big impact on you, it's a testimonial. You're just sharing with someone else, like, okay, dude, I got to tell you, I didn't realize, but I have this issue. I get defensive. I didn't realize I get defensive. Oh my! And they're like, yeah, you sure do. But by doing this, know yourself to lead yourself, you become authentic, and then people see that you're growing yourself. Then they're intrigued because they're like, oh, how did you learn that? And then they want to learn it for themselves. So.
Yeah.
So Matthew actually brought this up in the pre-show. He talked about the idea of, do you have to be skilled at something before you teach it? So Matthew, you want to kind of dive into that concept just a bit? Because I think Jeremie just opened the door there.
Yeah, well, it's something that's been debated for a long time, but the idea of, does someone actually have to have done something in order to teach something? You hear about the quote unquote fake gurus that teach someone how to build $1 million business, but they themselves have never built $1 million business. But yet, some of these gurus actually can be successful at teaching others to do something they haven't done themselves. You see this most often, I feel like, in sports, where some of the best coaches were not necessarily the best players, or even the ones that were the best at the position they're teaching. And so it's kind of that balance of, how much do you have to know before you can coach something effectively? And does that correlation have to exist? Or can you actually be an effective teacher if you've not done it yourself in the past?
I'm going to go a little nerdy. I'm not going to just give you a Sunday school answer. I'm going to go a little deeper. Okay. So let's break down influence. If you're going to have influence with someone and someone sees that you're someone of influence, like you actually know what you're talking about, then you have to have the competency with credibility. So if you don't have credibility, but you're only giving competence, you're only just sharing information, it'll only go so far. Meaning that they might lower their wall to listen to you a little bit, but you don't have full influence, because we can feel if you're faking it or if you're just espousing. And people build companies all the time on transferring information that they haven't done themselves. So we call it a training triangle, that you have to learn the information, imitate it before you can innovate it. So if you haven't imitated the information and you go from information directly to innovation, then there's danger there, because people will feel ultimately long-term. Usually those people are one and dones. They're like a quick flower that blooms and then they go away, because everyone realizes that they're just trading, they're just stealing because they haven't done it themselves. So, I mean, you can, of course, sure, you can teach anything to anybody at any time. It's not the teaching, it's not the transfer of the teaching, it's the influence of the teaching.
That makes sense.
We had a phrase, I used to work in medical devices, and we had a phrase in teaching. We'd say, see one, do one, teach one. And there's a really strong value in teaching, because when you have to break it down simple enough for a 13-year-old or for your class to understand it, that means you have to have a pretty concrete grasp of it.
The reality, though, guys, is that in the past, we were an apprenticeship culture. And because of technology, we moved from apprenticeship, industrial revolution to, this technology era. So it's like, no one's sitting there next to you going, how did you do that email? How did you work on Notion? I mean, you can, but in the past, it used to be bricklaying, or building a home. So it was like, okay, watch me. Okay, you see this? Don't put your finger here. You'll get electrocuted. You're going to die, and you had like literally physical hands-on in a factory. So I think we've lost a lot of that apprenticeship. I think we've lost a lot of training of people, because we move so fast. Now you're watching someone on YouTube, you're watching a YouTube video, and then you're kind of imitating there, but you're learning it from people in a digital world more so than you're learning it directly or face-to-face. And it's just changed the dynamic of, I think, teaching and learning.
Yeah.
Do you think we ought to consider going back to a system that uses apprenticeships, or do you think there's a better way now that we have technology? And
I don't think going back, I think adding apprenticeship. So the idea is you are actually, your job is to be a Sherpa. Your job is to help while you climb, help other people climb. So it's perform while helping people perform. And so if you have a Sherpa mindset, then your job is to get people to the next level. But most people have a climber mindset, and their mindset is just, how do I get to the top? And I years ago, I interviewed for one of my books called The 100X Leader. I interviewed the Sherpa on Mount Everest, and in a tent, they had Wi-Fi, and I asked them, I was like, "Okay, guys, so how many times have you made it to the top?" And they looked at me and are like, "That's such a Western question. We get that all the time. We hate that question." And one of them pulled off a belt, and it was Fanuru. And Fanuru pulled the belt, and he had 17 notches in his belt. And he goes, "I don't know how many times I've summited, but I've helped 17 people make it to the top."
Wow.
And it's like, it's a different mindset. And again, if you're a climber, which is just a performer, an employee, a person who's, great, be the best you can be. But for those who are leading people, you've got to get really, really good at teaching while you climb. And that's a hard job.
Yeah.
It's a great mentality, though. All right. So, Jeremie, you wrote a book called The Communication Code. I believe it came out just a few months ago, so it's still relatively new.
It did.
One of the goals you mentioned as I read through it, says, our goal is that you could take a problematic relationship and make it better, whether at home or work or both. It's a bold claim. I love it. We're in the middle of a relationship series here on Stacking Habits. And as humans, we're relational critters. And I believe that the strength of your relationships directly correlates to the impact you can have in the world. And so I'd like you to go back. You've got a business partner, co-founder, I believe, of Giant, and his name is Steve. We're going to be interviewing him later this week. So we're going to have a week full of Giant worldwide.
Yeah, fun.
But I'd love it if you could tell us about that infamous meeting at a restaurant called Jack and Alice just outside of London, where kind of the premise for this book was created.
Yeah, so I had just gotten back from America. We had a strategic partnership we were working on. I closed the deal. I was super excited to come back to meet with Steve, and I'm there, and I'm like in a celebratory mood, and this was like a late afternoon tea in England, tea time. So you're just kind of I don't know, it's 3:00, something like that, and so it just kind of felt pretty lighthearted. I come in and go, "Dude, I'm so fired up to talk about a few things. I want to celebrate a little bit." I share all this, and we get into it, and I start sharing the deal. "Hey, we did it. We closed it." I'm kind of there ready for the high five. And I said, "It's a little different than we thought. It's going to be like X, not Y. And it's even bigger than I thought and than we thought. But it's just different." And then, so Steve just starts and he goes, "Well, I thought maybe you'd call me before. Like, why did we, and how did you?" And that's just, and literally I had like a celebration cake with a candle on it, and he just put water and just poured right on it, figuratively. And I just started turning beet red, and I'm like starting to Hulk out, actually. Clothes are starting to rip, and I could feel it coming. And it was like pent up anger of this same situation happening over and over again in the past. And I let all these records of wrongs come with this, and it just sparked. And I literally just almost took the table over and like, "Are you kidding me? Why can't you celebrate anything? This is better than we thought, better, blah, blah, blah." And I just started going off on Steve. And he's like, and everyone in the restaurant could hear it too. And they're like, "Whoa." And that was not like me. I understand, but it built up in me. And I go,
typical brash American is in here making a stink.
Yeah. I go, "All I want to do is celebrate." And he goes, "Why didn't you say that?" I'm like, "I did say that. Why did you not pick it up? Why didn't you pick up the clues? Because you went straight to critique, and you're being critical when you don't need to be." And I showed him the deal points, and sure enough, it was better than, but it still was the idea of like, this happens every single time. And then we sat down, and once we calmed down, and once I calmed down, we actually built the tool. We didn't leave. We were there probably 3 hours, and we didn't leave until we built the tool that's in that book. And we started using it over and over and over again, and it started working. So we've been using this construct for about 8 years on communication and how to unlock relationships. And it's now used all over the globe, from consultants and coaches and companies that integrate it in. Super simple, but super powerful.
That's great. And I love, in the intro of the book, you said both you and Steve have become adept at mining out our areas of weakness. So I love that. There's always two mentalities. One, do you try and fix what's lagging, or do you focus on the strengths and try and improve those? And I think the answer is usually both. And it says when you kind of looked at your areas of weakness together, you came up with communication was at the top of the weaknesses. So I love that idea of the Sherpa mindset where you're fixing your own problems and then saying, hey, here's this construct. So why don't we dive right in? What is this construct? And I already alluded to it. There's 5 bullet points, and I'll start with C. But love, you went in with celebration, and what are the other 4 that kind of?
So the idea is that every one of us, when we think we're communicating, most of us are transmitting. Transmission is not communication. Transmission is I'm sharing what my thoughts are. Communication is when someone receives it and shares it back. So communication is actually, it's shared expectation. I have an expectation of something. Do you know what it is? And so it's like expectation is attached to that transmission. And basically the communication code are 5 code words similar to the kind of the cipher model. I mean, we use the Enigma code in World War II as our example. If you understand the cipher of someone and understand what their expectations are and meet their expectation, their walls go down. But most people have an expectation, the other person misses it, and their wall goes up, and no one knows why, because no one communicates clearly what it is. So the 5 C's are basically celebrate, care, clarify, collaborate, and critique. So the idea is that these are expectations that people attach to communication. So I'm sitting here with you, Matthew, and man, it's been a rough week, and I'm so tired and I'm so beat down. I just need you to care. I just need to talk, man. I need a safe friend. I don't need your critique for sure. I really don't need any collaboration. I don't even want you to clarify. Can you just let me, I don't want to there's nothing to celebrate. Would you just care for me and let me be? And that's like a good buddy, or that's like a spouse situation, or like, just listen. That's an example of care. Celebrate, I already shared. Hey man, I'm fired up. Let's go. I just need a high five. I don't need a parade. I just need an outlet to tell someone how excited I am about something. Clarify is I need to know that you know what I'm talking about before you add any collaboration. Because if I don't know that you understand me, it's going to be really frustrating. So let's make sure that you're clear. Collaborate is, you know what, Caleb, you're really good at this, and I want your input because I want you to make what I'm working on better, because I really trust and value that. And then critique, which very rarely do people want. Most of the time, that's what people give. But critique is different than critical. To critique someone is actually to make it better. So it's like take an idea, shoot holes in it, and then go work on it and make it better. So that's an example of critique. All 5 of those are expectations of what people want. And we have custom codes. I want some things very specifically. And if you know me well, you should learn what my code words are and be really, really good at connecting. And my walls will go down, and then we'll have good relationship. But most relationships, they don't know the code words. And over time, they do something over and over and over again and expect a different result, right? And it doesn't work. And so all we've done is give you code words to maybe solve your relationship issues.
I love those words. And a 6th word came to mind as I was kind of processing through, and I was actually using this framework as I was chatting with my wife last night. I'm sure
this collaboration?
Well, you had the collaboration.
Are we collaborating here?
Yeah, we are for sure. I wanted to celebrate when we came in because I know that you're a celebrator and a collaborator. But that 6th word is connect. And I think it's actually what these 5 are aimed to do. So good relationships will have a strong sense of connection. And if you're missing these, or you talk about where you just keep adding complexity to the code and then people try and hide to protect themselves, then we end up feeling disconnected, which is the opposite of what we want.
It is the result of the communication code. If you do this well, you will connect, which is what communication is. It's transmission plus receiving. So the transmitter has a receiver, you've got a connection. So to your point, absolutely, that's the end goal.
And then this tends to work pretty well across both families, friends, work relationships, anywhere relationships are involved.
Yes, except if you've been a complete jerk for the past 10 years. So that's the biggest issue. The first two chapters of the book talk about your past. What's it been like to be on the other side of you? And if you brought consistent challenge but no support, so you dominated a person for a long, long period of time, and you can't just read it and then all of a sudden go, oh, I'm now a perfect communicator, because that other person has a pent up frustration from the years and they have their walls up. So they're looking over the wall barely because they know they put on this Kevlar because they know what it's like to be on the other side of you. So the first part of the book is actually you taking one relationship that you want to improve, ask the question, what's it been like to be on the other side of you? And then get really meaty and gritty and going, hey, have you had a negative power test taken? Do you have negative power? Like maybe you have a personality that drives them crazy, or maybe you've had a title that is higher than theirs and and they feel insecure to you, or whatever the issue has been. So you have to do that work first in order for communication to really work. Because if you just all of a sudden assume, hey, I got a new tool, I'm going to teach it to you, and the other person has their arms folded and their walls up, it's going to take 3, 6, 9 months of you being different with them to actually let them in your life, or let you in their life.
Yeah, there's another C word then. There has to be consistency over time for people to trust that, they can actually, connect with you.
Yeah, I like that you're saying it's not like a magic bullet. Like it's going to take time. You can't just implement this and expect all your relationships to be fixed overnight. Like it's a tool, but it's not magic. It has to be implemented over time. And I like that you said you have to be aware of what's happened in that relationship in the past to know kind of how to address that. I think that's huge, because I have that tendency. I'll read something like this and say, hey, I'm going to implement these things in my relationships. It'll improve them all going forward. But in reality, like you said, it's not always that simple. Sometimes you have to do that analysis of that relationship and see where you struggled in the past. I think that's really important. That's a really cool thing you called out.
But it's also the process, the communication code is a great framework to start now with a relationship, because you practice it. They don't even have to know it. You don't even have to teach it to them. If I'm just talking to Caleb, I'm like, hey, dude, that sounds awesome, man, I can't wait to hear. Before you do, what would you like from me? You want me to collaborate? You want me to clarify? What would be most helpful? And so you can use it. And then by doing even the process of using it, you're building up they're like, well, that was respectful. That's helpful.
Yeah.
You don't even have to teach it to them. You just start practicing it. Like, hey, you can tell, you start looking for it. They're obviously wanting to celebrate. And so then you celebrate with them, right? And it's missed expectations that cause drama. And a missed expectation inside these relationships, it doesn't have to be that way. We just put some language around it so that maybe it sets it up, it tees it up to be a good conversation.
I like the approach to it. You mentioned that most people have sort of two of these that are more common or more comfortable for them than others. And in your experience, is there one that like most people kind of default to and is very common that we should just be on the lookout for? And you mentioned critique. Most people don't like to receive critique just because our walls go up and our defenses go up. But is there one of these that you see most people have and is kind of a natural, like the English of these, or is there one that's a little bit more out there?
Well, I would say most men have a tendency to critique, and it's just almost a habit to their kids or spouse, and they're just automatically, they critique or collaborate. And you'll find it's really more like thinkers, especially men who are thinkers, and the majority are. So therefore, they'll come across as like, oh, I can fix that. I can solve that. Well, why don't you just do this? Well, why did you do that? Well, that's dumb. And in their minds, they're thinking, I'm just solving it for you to save you time, right? But that is a tendency that we often see. So whereas feelers will have a tendency to want care or celebrate or get clarity. They want to make sure that they're harmonizing, they're relational. And so that's where a lot of tension will come in with thinker and feeler. And so that's what we see often. And so for the thinker, it's almost like, you've heard of the golden rule, obviously, do unto others as you'd want done. Well, it gets misinterpreted a lot. So I like the platinum rule. The golden rule misinterpreted is like, well, I don't need a hug. Why should you? I didn't get training. Why do you need it? Versus the platinum rule, do unto others as they would want done to themselves. So in relationships, what is it they want? What do they need right now? And like, well, they need care right now. Now, you might challenge that and go, they always need care, but until they're at a place where they feel that you're for them, then they'll always put up a wall if they think that you're against them or for yourself. So really, really fighting for the idea of like, hey, I'm gonna help get them to the next level, and I'm gonna build my relationship, but I'm gonna focus on what they need versus on what I need.
I think that's a pretty good definition of love. And you mentioned that in the book as well, where you said this is a definition of love, and the idea of fighting for, I think it's the highest good of the other is the way you phrased that. I'm curious, why did you say a definition of love? Because it kind of seems like the definition of love.
Well, there's all types of, there's agape love, there's eros,
Phileo.
There's different, phileo, all these different terms of love. So agape love is really, the idea of fighting is actually foreign to the idea of love, but we feel like we're that passionate about it. Like love is to fight for the highest possible good until that becomes a present reality, right? So if I'm fighting for your highest best, then I'm going to do things, and I'm going to work hard on my communication, and I'm going to ask for, apologies when necessary, or I'm going to call you up. I'm not going to call you out. So all of it is the spirit of you as a human to go, are you focused on my highest possible good, or is it only on yours? And, that is just a level that, most of us don't experience that in relationships. And so we're always working around drama of the other person. And so we just built a book that is highly practical to go, if you want to get your relationships to the next level, then we find that most people don't spend time on this level. They might go to therapy and do all this stuff. Sometimes that's, by the way, I'm not downing any of that. That could be really, really helpful for a lot of people. But oftentimes it's just simply these little habits, these little hacks that don't need therapy. They just need you to be aware of what's it like to be on the other side of you. And so it could just simply be learning the communication code. Could be a hack that all of a sudden turns it to be focused on them more than on you.
Yeah, and you call them hacks, and people will knock that all day and say we don't need hacks, we need actual habits that will last. But the reality is, I love frameworks, because until you can call something what it is, or have language to sort of create that container and understand what's going on, you're just clueless. And so you're like, just like you had that dinner with Steve where you go in going, man, I just wanted to celebrate. I wanted a high five. I wanted an attaboy. And in response, like, we just got off the rails, and I ended up frustrated. And I love having that tool. I think that's it on the theoretical side. Matthew, do you have any other, just like understanding the framework or kind of prying at any of that before we turn more practical and dig into habits?
No, not really. I like that you said at the very beginning that it should be something you should be able to explain to someone on a napkin. And when you get to something this simple with simple words that are easy to remember, 5 C's you can go through in your mind. To me, almost like Caleb just said, having something where you can explain it, put language behind it, and then have a simple action to associate with it, I think is really key. Because I know there's a lot of books you guys have probably read, I've read, where it's a great concept while you're reading it. It all sounds great. When you're done with it, it was so complex that you almost need to go through it a second time, get a notebook down, try and write it and translate it yourself into something usable. It was great in the moment, but not much transfers with it. I like something like this where you can read this, like I said, write it down on a napkin, and it can easily transfer and have something you can immediately put into action. I wish more books followed that kind of formula, because it would make it easier for us as readers to read it and actually be able to apply it in our lives the next day, than kind of have to figure out what the author intended and the best applicable way to put it in our action in our lives. So I really like that simple framework. Maybe it's because I've got a simple mind, but I like simple frameworks like that.
That's true. Well, that's meant to be that way. We had my book right before this. I've written a lot of books. So this is the Peace Index. No surprise, there's 5 P's. But the idea is that you have to be at peace. So if let's just say, for instance, you're around someone whose peace index is at 40%. and you're at 90%. And then all of a sudden, any critique that you give is inflamed by their lack of peace. So these are dynamics. So then you put these books next to each other and they all start playing on one another. And that's kind of how we built them. And so that's our whole business model is we teach these tools inside organizations, and we coach coaches and consultants. We license our content to coaches and consultants around the world, and then they use them inside their coaching practices. So.
And is most of the coaching done in the business world, or is there a lot of interpersonal communication type stuff too?
There's a myriad of different types. And so we have, there's a myriad of different types. We've got coaches in the coaching counseling world. We've got business coaches, life coaches, consultants, all over. So it's however they want to apply it.
Like it. And then you used a bit of an analogy, which I'd never quite heard before. You said relationships are like a puzzle. The problem is that you often need the picture on the box to understand what it's supposed to look like. So now that we have the communication code, we have these 5 C's, we essentially have a picture that sort of describes reality or how we show up. The question then is, how do we start putting these puzzle pieces together? So you do a lot of consulting, you do a lot of coaching. Once you've laid out the framework, I keep coming back to that word, but once you've laid out the framework, what are some practical tips in terms of how do people start to put this into motion?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one is, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with other people. So far as it depends on you, start with yourself, not the other person. So a lot of times they'll go, man, I wish Caleb would, ... And that list is long, Caleb. I mean, a whole bunch of people have given me stuff about you. And so
we don't have enough time.
But I wish, so what that means is I wish it's up to you versus like, hey, so far as it depends on me, man, I think I'm realizing that I'm critiquing all the time, right? So that's the first framework that I like to, or question I like to ask. So far as it depends on you, what's it like to be on the other side of you? Are you willing to do the hard yards? So the second thing that I do, this is an actual habit, stacking habit concept that I do every single day. And there's 2 in particular that I'll say. Number one is I do a call-up session every morning with myself. And a call-up session is just a reminder of my identity. It's a reminder of who I am. I literally call myself in to my position and authority in my work that I do. And that can sound kind of cheesy to some people, and I'm okay. It's not for them, it's for me. So things like, dude, you're a liberator, man. You're a freedom fighter. You got this. Come on, wake up. Today's it's not about you. It's about that. And I'm reminding myself who I am, because you have to counter the negative, especially on my sports psych world. And when I'm working with athletes and the negative mindset that comes in, it's one negative can replace 7 positives. So it's this idea that you have to actually do the hard work of calling yourself up into your position and into your authority. So I do that in the morning. And then in the evening on the way home,
Jeremie, when you're calling yourself up, is this, because you kind of seem like an analytical person, maybe I'm reading that wrong. Is this like a list of affirmations that you're reading, or do you have like some background pump up music and you're dancing into the room? Like what does this actually look like?
I wake up and I usually will turn the shower on because I work out in the afternoons. So I'll do a morning, I'll just kind of wake myself up and I'll turn the shower on and I'm kind of mumbling to myself. And I'm like, okay, where are you? What are you? Just that kind of thing. And then I'll just kind of go into the shower and I'll have this kind of mantra of like that. And it will turn into a prayer. It'll turn into kind of, contemplation, but I'm just getting myself ready for the day. And sometimes that takes 1 minute. Sometimes that goes 5 minutes. And I'm just reminding myself about kind of my authority, kind of what I'm designed to do. We don't have time for it, but I had a near-death experience years ago where I literally was gone 4.5, 5 minutes after being hit by a drunk driver in a hurricane in Mexico. And,
wow.
It changed my entire life. It changed my view. So I'm like, I get another chance of living. So I'm living at a much higher level. I'm thinking deeper. I'm fighting for people. It's not just how much can I make and what kind of house can I have. I mean, it's like, it's just different. And so because of that, I just go, I'm responsible for leading myself. And that's what a call up is for me.
I love that.
I like that.
Did Giant Worldwide perhaps get started pretty soon after that accident?
I had just started Giant right before the accident, one day before.
Oh, wow.
And we actually came back from that trip. Giant used to be all capital. And we came back from the trip and I squashed the I to a little I. And it stands for humility, not pride. So it's basically the idea of doing big things in a humble way. So anyway, so I do that. And then in the afternoon, my habit is, I call it's an examine. I stole it from the Jesuits, but the idea, can I say that? Stole it from the Jesuits, but anyway.
Sure.
But the idea, this guy named Loyola, Ignatius, amazing story, but he had this examine process. I took it and made it my own. And what I do at the end of the day is my watch will go off at about 5:20. It'll say examine, and I'll go, what was I grateful for today? What was a highlight of my day? One or two things. And then if I'm not driving, or I'll just tell Siri, text Caleb, text Matthew, tell him thank you for a great. I'll text someone, or I'll just be grateful for that. I don't write it down. And then the next thing I do is I go, where was I off today? Where was I off? Where was I not at peace today? Usually it's all around relationships. Sometimes it's my own mindset. But it's like now I'm looking for patterns to go, was it them or me? And I usually start with me. So far as it depends on me, where am I off? I hate it when it does that, the video. But where was it? Was it me or was it them? Right. And so usually it's me. And then that's when I go through my know yourself, lead yourself. Oh, there's your tendency, Jeremy. Your tendency is to get defensive. Yeah, you got defensive. That's what happened. When does that happen? It happens. Why does that happen again? What did you do? What could you have done next time? What can you do? And I give myself grace and laugh it off. And I go, oh yeah, I got defensive. It showed up like this. This is what I did. I raised my voice. I actually kind of bowed up a little bit. And then what was the consequence? I didn't like that. And then the reality is, if I don't apologize, then that reality is I'm going to create discord in that relationship. So I might go, dude, Steve, or pick someone, man, I'm so sorry. I was off. It was my defensive tendency again. And I didn't choose my action. So I let it get the best of me. My bad. I'm sorry. My fault. Forgive me. Right. And then what I do is I clear the air and I reset it. And then I go, next time, my trigger point is, I know my trigger point, trade up to a different action. So I've gotten pretty good at trading up, and I catch myself before I do my normal tendency. And that habit has been the game changer in my influence, because I've counted, I have 32 tendencies that I found about myself. And because of those 32 tendencies, I know now when they're going to happen and why they're going to happen. And I catch about 75% of them. So therefore, I catch myself before I do a stupid foot in the mouth or blunder or normal thing. And it's just been kind of a fun self-awareness process. Even though you never graduate from the school of self-awareness, it's worthy work.
So I know there's a habit loop where it starts with a stimulus and then some sort of a response, and then there's typically some sort of reward. It sounds like you're interrupting that loop by being aware of it. And then before your subconscious action takes place, you're going, you mentioned trade up. What does that mean?
Trade up, it means this is what I normally do. Let me trade up to something better. So we call them trade up at Giant. So you're like, your normal action is this. Or when I'm working with athletes, I'm like, okay, what are you going to tend to do now? I'm going to get down on myself. I'm going to speak. I'm going to shout at somebody else and say it's their fault. What would a trade up be? So a trade up be what's a better action? And so that's just the words we use.
Yeah. When you came up with that list of 32 tendencies, is this another framework that you've built where you sort of have a menu of common tendencies and you look for what kind of rhymes like you?
So it's a good question. I found those tendencies over the last 7 years. So it's been 32 tendencies in 7 years. You know what I mean? So it tells you how many you find. And then some of them I just do them over and over again. But
Sure.
it's that framework I gave you: know yourself to lead yourself. So I put it in an Airtable. What's my tendency? What's my pattern? When do I do it, and
Yep.
why do I do it? What do I tend to do? My action. What's the consequence of that action? And then what reality does it shape? So that's the Airtable that I put it in. And then I use it to find the tendencies. I find it like, where was I off today? That's one. The other tendency is in the 5 voices. Once you know your personality and wiring, it's predictive leadership behavior. Because you got most connectors they're hyper and they overshare. It's just true. Most connectors get defensive. Most pioneers blow people up. They're impatient and they slam doors. Most in every one of those, there's tendencies with every personality. So that's the interesting part about it.
Got it. And for those listening, we'll have Steve on the podcast next week, and he'll actually be going through the 5 voices. So if that sounds like
good.
an interesting language, we'll be diving into that
fun.
next week as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Scrolling my notes here. 1 second.
I'm just taking notes here. I'm trying to write all this down.
Yeah. One interesting thing, Jeremie, I've got this probably flawed view of relationships in that I call it parabolize. And so you actually mentioned the relational stages from social psychology. You talk about just meeting someone, so acquaintanceship. You got the build up, the excitement, you're spending more time together. You've got the continuation, so this excitement or this connection is maintained. And then there's something called deterioration, which of course tends to happen because we're human, and that can be any decline in the relationship. Then we sort of have this fork in the road with repair. Are we going to care enough about this relationship to attempt to fix it? Or, do you want to work on yourself enough to do this? And if you do the work for repair, then it kind of brings it back into continuation. If you don't, then it goes all the way downhill and terminates. Is this just how relationships work in general? And they all require work, and you always end up in this continual loop of trying to say, are we going to fix this and fight for this?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is, because the reality is all relationships aren't equal. There's a relationship with family, my son, my daughters, my wife. Those are going to be different than my relationships with my business partners versus best friends. So there's different levels of relational depth and trust, and even grace. Like with family, you're kind of stuck with each other. You don't really fire family, right? So
maybe we will,
but it creates a different dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And with family. And so to that point, it's like, man, is this really worth it or not? And so I think it's the idea of investment. You have to walls continue to creep up over time because we're so busy and we all have something to do. If you don't maintain, then it can grow cold. And so you have to stoke the fire of influence to go, oh yeah, I remember why I liked you. Oh dude, it's so good to see you. But the more that you do that, the easier it is to reestablish. If there's been a pain, or if there's been a lack of trust, or there's a scar, then that's what usually happens. So in most relationships, it's that way. I describe a friend in the book, and I had to decide: is it worth it? Is this friendship worth it? Because I ask in the book, choose one person to think about through the entire book, and let's see if we can figure that person out. And in my case, as I was writing it to this dear friend of mine. We've been friends forever, but we just kind of lost it. It just hasn't been. And I lived in different places, and we live now in the same city. And I've just literally been deciding, is it worth it, since the book even came out. And so I decided I'm actually going to lean in and go one more try in a different way. I'm going to try something completely different. And the response was really well received. And so I've got a meeting with this person in the next couple of weeks. And so I'm hoping that this friendship kind of rekindles because we were so close for so long. But I just think that the cares of the world, I think kids, those meddling kids in our life, I think spouse dynamics, we have a friend, we had 2 friends and another set of friends, they got a divorce. We were friends with both of them. So one of them we're not as close with now. You know what I mean? And so those are just dynamics. That's just real life. So that was a long answer to say yes.
That's good to see the colors of that. When you think through, so you have a lot of relationships, both at work, as you guys lead a pretty good organization and family, you've got 3 kids. How do you think about how to, like, what are the rhythms of even going and trying to decide if you want to stoke the flames of a friend? Because there's a lot of people that have sort of gone through this parabola where, you know, they're kind of on the way down, or they're just in a period of deterioration. And some of that's just natural. Do you have something that, like, you look for as a sign, or something that resonates with you that says, hey, it's time to try and stoke this flame again? Or where do you determine where to spend your energy?
Well, so first, if you're listening to this, then there's 2 types of friends. There's deal friends and real friends. Deal friends are work friends. These are people that you're friends because it's tied to your business. If you retire and once you're done with work, those people usually go on the wayside. You might be acquaintances, but maybe Facebook friends, but they're not real friends. The other part is, are you an extrovert or introvert? So are introverts need less friends than extroverts do. I'm an extrovert. So to answer your question, my wife and I are at this stage of life, and we're empty nesters. So now it's like, hey, let's go. Let's have fun. Let's enjoy. Who do we want to be around? And so to rekindle any friendship or talk about it, which is really happening right now, we're looking for 2 things. Are they responsive? Or are they resistant? If they're resistant, is it because of us? Is it because of their own issues that are going on in life? Or is there something we're clueless about? What happened? We was really good, because over time, those kind of things can drift apart. And so if they're responsive, then responsive means, hey, they're open, they're excited, it's mutual. Let's go. Let's have fun. Let's go to dinner. So, we test that out. And because you have social stuff where you're like, let's have our friends dinner. Who do you want to go to dinner with? And that tells you a lot. Who do you want to go on trips with? That's a whole nother level of friendship, right? And there's certain people. And then there's the issue, if you're married, then the spouse likes one of them and you don't like the other person, right? So it's just both together. So it's complicated, but I think it can definitely be done.
So at this stage with the empty nest, I know you work with the football team and you travel around quite a bit still. What is a goal that you're sort of looking for as you kind of figure out where to spend that? So kind of a follow-up to that question. Do you have kind of a goal that you're looking for at this stage of life?
So what's interesting is I am a serial entrepreneur, and I have basically a startup studio. I have a number of companies that I'm working on starting. And so we've got different team leaders that are CEOs running each one of those companies. I'm not the CEO of any of them. I'm the founder, I'm the creator. And so I've got that whole world that's rich because I apprentice these people, and I'm really, really tied into them and tight with them. So the dynamics are really, they're kind of my deal and real friends mixed together, if you will. And so for me, what I'm really looking for personally is just buddies. And so we built a neighborhood. It's another thing we did. My wife and I built a modern farmhouse neighborhood, and it's 25 houses, and so 21 houses on 50 acres. Really, really cool. But we just have fire pits and we just hang out, and we kind of built it as an intentional community, and it's kind of turned into that. It's like, hey, it's actually met our expectations, and there's friendships there. So it's like, what do you need to be alive? That's ultimately what it is. And some people, they need 1 friend, 2 friends. Great. That's good. Me, I need a good circle of 3 to 5 people. I need another 10 or 12 out here. And then I want the 50 to 70 that are just kind of fun. So I want different ranges of friendships. So for me, it's going to be very different than maybe other introverts.
Yeah, it occurs to me it's kind of like different orbits in your friends. When you built the neighborhood, side question, did you control or invite who came in, or did you put them on the market and whoever showed up, showed up?
We did Facebook ads. Spent $6,000 on Facebook ads and didn't use realtors. And we sold the lots. We sold all the lots in 24 months.
And did you state some sort of a vision of, hey, we want this neighborhood to be closer than a normal neighborhood?
We put a website with a long table down the middle and said, this is an intentional community.
Oh my goodness.
We built a meeting house. So we have a community house that we have parties. It's not a cult. That's the one thing I want to be.
Yeah, but
People always like, is this a cult?
if you have to say it's not a cult, then it might be.
It's a cult. No, but when people come to the prairie, it's called the Prairie at Post. And when they come, they're like, what is this? Because it looks like Architectural Digest kind of neighborhood. It's just very, very, it's California modern style homes all around water. And we wanted to make the houses like like a lake house as your primary house. So it feels very like a retreat in that regard. And so, but it definitely is around intentional relationships because that's kind of how we're wired.
Man, I want to just quit this first conversation and now just talk about this idea of intentional relationships. I do want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to research that more. You said Prairie at Post is what it's called?
The Prairie at Post in Arcadia, Oklahoma, right by the lake.
I'm going to look into this because I've got a couple friend groups. We've joked about doing this, but one of the things that I've just thought through, and we'll maybe end here and be respectful of your time, Jeremie, but if you're going to build an intentional community, which you've done, I think one of the first things you have to figure out is how do you deal with conflict? Because conflict is inevitable. And if you can't handle it, then you're going to let that community break apart. It just naturally will. Mm-hmm. So is that true? Is that probably the hardest part of it? And if so, how have you kind of gone after that?
So in the neighborhood, we actually created a very strong HOA rules. And we created a positive and a negative. We had a framework. A positive was basically we make each other better. That's really it. Let's just work to make each other better. Second is to handle negative. It's called go to the source. So in our neighborhood, if we have an issue, I don't tell Matthew about it. I come to you, Caleb. Mm-hmm. So as much as possible to be at peace with every person, you go to the source. There's not complaining. There's no whining. There's no passive aggressive emails. And we've had plenty of opportunities in the last 5 years to, have these situations happen and, this not go the way and blah, blah, blah. And so we've just had a lot of grace for it. We're all pretty chill, but it kind of turned into an entrepreneur neighborhood. So we're all pretty responsive and, I didn't plan it that way. It just kind of happened. But, surprisingly, I'm sure there's certain neighbors that don't like other neighbors, but I don't know that, it's not widespread. There's no drama like that. And so far so good. And it's for sure not perfect, but it's been fun trying.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'm definitely going to pick your brain on that more. Well, Jeremie, you mentioned you're a serial entrepreneur. You've got your hand in a lot of different cookie jars. If people hear about this, and of course, we'll link to a lot of your sites, your personal site and the books as well. But is there one other particular place you want people to go to learn more?
Yeah, Giant Worldwide, if you love this kind of stuff, you can get certified in the content, if you're in a company, you can get certified if you're not a coach or a consultant, but you just want to bring it into your company. So giantworldwide.com, or if you're a coach or a consultant, then that's who we work with. And we partner with them to take our content into organizations.
Perfect. We will link to all that and more. Jeremie, thank you so much for collaborating with us and again, get to celebrate your book, The Communication Code. We really appreciate your time, and we will catch everybody next week with Jeremie's business partner, Steve.